Welcome to Cultural Catalyst, the podcast that shines a light on the creative visionaries working behind the scenes in arts and entertainment. I'm your host, Alison McNeil, CEO and founder of McNeil Creative Enterprises. With over 20 years of experience advocating for equity and sustainable growth in the arts and entertainment, I've seen firsthand the power of the behind-the-scenes creatives. Here on Cultural Catalyst, the creatives behind the curtain take center stage. Let's celebrate the people who make the magic happen. Let's dive in. This episode is brought to you by Words, Beats, and Life. It's never too early or too late to explore or expand your creative expression. Rediscover hip-hop culture today at wblinc.org. Okay, we are here. Welcome back to Cultural Catalyst. I'm your host, Alison McNeil, and today I'm excited to welcome Amina Cooper. Amina is a pioneering public art leader who's reshaping how communities engage with art in public spaces. As the first ever director of arts and culture at Atlanta Beltline Art, one of the largest temporary public art exhibitions in the United States, she oversees programming that reaches nearly 20 Atlanta communities while advancing equity and inclusion. An Atlanta native with over a decade of experience, Amina manages multimillion-dollar public art projects through her consulting firm, Amina Fine Art, and previously oversaw commissions at Charlotte Douglas International Airport. Beyond her institutional work, she's a thought leader in equitable public art policy as the inaugural Forecast Change Lab Research Fellow and founder of At Black Monuments, which documents public artworks by Black artists nationwide. Her work is expansive, intentional, and deeply rooted in community, which makes her a perfect guest for Cultural Catalyst. Amina, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Wow, that was like, ooh.
So let's make sure we actually describe the people that we're talking to because you all are incredible and we need to give you your flowers. We want people to know the amazing folks that are behind what people experience when they're out in the world. So,
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be chatting with
thanks.
you.
Okay. I got a few questions. So, you're an Atlanta native who's now returned home to lead Atlanta Beltline Art. What was it like growing up in Atlanta, and how did that shape your understanding of public space and community?
Well, I mean, I'm gonna date myself, obviously, but I'm an 80s baby. So growing up in Atlanta from the 80s and having parents that have been here since the 70s, I feel like I was in Atlanta during like a wonderful golden era. Atlanta is known for being a very progressive city, especially when it comes to Black leadership and having leaders in civic spaces and government spaces that are Black. So seeing that was a really wonderful and really formative place to observe and be able to sort of see myself as having the capacity to lead one day. So that was wonderful. And then obviously Atlanta has such a rich cultural history in the visual arts, obviously, but also in music and film and television. And we are still occupying that space today. So I'm super excited to be back in Atlanta, to be working in the arts. My very first job was working in the arts in a civic capacity for the city. So it's so interesting how things twist and turn in your life, but I'm really happy to be in this place now.
That is so cool. One of the things that I heard you say, which I think is a through line through all of the guests in season 1, and for myself, is like you saw someone leading with agency and you were like inspired, you knew you could do it. I always say growing up in the DC area, I was born in DC, raised in Maryland. It's like a different world here. If you like leave this area and even go further south, it's completely different. And so you grow up here with Black people looking and doing all the things. So your opportunities feel limitless. And so that is a gift.
Yeah, and you don't realize it. I think it's funny how I went from Atlanta to DC and kind of maybe thought that that was the norm, or maybe I was just wanting to make sure I was staying in spaces that had that rich sort of vibrant Black community and a safe space. So, but you're right, it is not like that everywhere. You will quickly find out
Listen,
as you move
I
out.
prefer this area. I've only lived in maybe 2 or 3 other places, but it's nothing like being around people and vibing out with people and, like you said, having the cultural connections that show you and others on screen, stage, and space. So, okay, so how did
Absolutely.
you first fall in love with public art? Was there a moment or a piece that made you realize this was your work?
Yeah, and it's plenty, we were talking about how people experience public art and maybe don't know it. But my teachers always would tell my mom and my dad that I was a visual learner. I've always been really excited and activated by spaces around me in visual arts. But yeah, my first sort of formative or memorable experience with public art, I was traveling. My mom worked for Delta, as a lot of folks in Atlanta, they'll tell you they know somebody that worked for worked for Delta Airlines. My mom worked for Delta, and we spent a lot of time in the airport. And even back in the late 80s, Atlanta's airport had a really great public art program, and they still do now. But there is a spot in the airport back in the day where you would come out of sort of the security line and you have to go through this escalator, and the escalator had these really super 80s style neon lights by artist Steven Antonakis. And as like a 6-year-old, I would see that and I was just get so excited. I will never forget that work. I mean, it's not there anymore. It's been taken down now, but always made me realize I was getting ready to travel somewhere. I was going to start an adventure. And that was one of my more memorable sort of like, oh, this is art and it's in a public space and we can all enjoy it. And obviously, Atlanta has a really wonderful public art program. The city has done a really wonderful job. Just another really memorable work is Playscapes at St. Piedmont Park. It's a Noguchi work, but it's like a really artfully, tastefully done playground for kids, and it's world renowned, world famous. But yeah, that's another piece as a child that I love. So it's one of the things that I think about now is making sure that when you're thinking about or programming work, that you're thinking about how it will interface with people from all heights, all ages, all walks of life, all backgrounds, and because that those two works really inspired me, and I still love them today.
I love that you said heights. I'm like, yeah, of course. But you know what? I
Yeah.
have 2 questions, of course, from what you just said. First, I assume that people that are listening know what public art is. Like sometimes people in the arts, they just start talking about the things. And I'm like, I know what public art is. You know what public art is. Can you help us with
Right.
the definition of what is public art?
Yes. Well, it's funny, that's gonna throw me off because there's like so many different ways to define public art. There's like if you go to a public art textbook, there's a
Mm.
definition. I kind of like to use a very basic
Perfect.
understanding of public art. For me, it's visual art or performing art, any sort of creative representation of somebody's culture that is in the public
Mm.
space. I think most people will understand that as historically there have been works of men on horses, on bronze. That's public art, and that's the kind of public art that was the earliest kind of programmed, really quote unquote programmed public artwork. But there's also a lot of cities with great mural traditions. Cities like Chicago have great mural traditions, and California also. So murals, works of sculpture, you come out of a civic building downtown, often you'll see a big sculpture in somebody's courtyard or workspace. That's another traditional way people have expressed public art. But I think now what's exciting is that there's a much more expansive understanding that's much more inclusive of everybody's sort of cultural
Mhm.
traditions and visual traditions as well. So I think that's the exciting place that at least the public art world and industry is at now, is that people are looking at parades and festivals and second line as public
Nice.
art, concerts, performances as public art if it happens in a public
Yeah.
space, graffiti and style writing as public art as well. So It's an exciting time. But yes, if you see a work of art and as you're walking about and you're in somewhere, you're at an airport, you're outside of the historical context that you've seen art, which is like a museum, then you're probably encountering public
Yeah,
art.
thank you for that definition. And so for those that are now like, oh my gosh, I'm surrounded by public art and I didn't know that's what it was called. Thank you for saying that. As before we started recording,
Yeah.
I was telling Amina, I remember it was either the 90s, sometime in the 90s, I think, when I was growing up in the DC area. In DC, there were these elephants all around the city. They all were painted differently. One had like a metro map all around it. Another had another sort of design around it. And I was like, what is this? I remember, I think that's the first time I noticed it.
Yeah.
And then I thought, who does that? For the listeners, Amina one of the people that makes that happen. And so, okay, the other question I had was like, you mentioned you saw the neon lights in the airport that made you feel like, okay, we're going on a trip. But how did you see that, get excited about that, and then move to, and so I want to do it for a living? How did you know it was something you could do, and how did you get to it?
That's a great question. And I ask myself that a lot. But I'll tell you the real answer. So I knew probably maybe like my last year in high school that I wanted to have a career in the visual arts. And I was saying earlier, my first job was working for the city of Atlanta. They had a program. I mean, it's called the Office of Cultural Affairs now, but back then it was the Bureau of Cultural Affairs. And they had a program where they would hire apprentice artists to work with real artists, real professional artists, adults over the summer. And I did that for 2 summers. And I was like, oh, the city has an arts program. Governments have arts programs. Like, I would love to do that. And all the women that were the grown-ups working in that program were beautiful and were fly. And I was like, oh, I can
Yeah.
do this one day. So I ended up at Howard, ended up studying photography and journalism because my mom wanted to make sure I had a plan B.
Hey, mom.
In case the art stuff didn't pan out. And I studied visual arts, leaning into art history, knew that I didn't want to be a professional photographer because I did that working as an apprentice for a photographer on the Hill and hated that. I was in DC and the art world is a little different there. Ended up at Boston University and studied arts administration because I figured, well, if I wanted to be behind the scenes working in the arts, I need to understand what that is. And so this is after 2008, after the recession, that was the field that she went into, arts administration. That was like, if you wanted to be, working in an office building, but doing arts related things, that's what you got your degree in. So doing that in Boston, I took some courses called community arts. And it was essentially about programming arts for communities. And that was sort of like my first sort of idea, like, oh, public art is a thing. But even then, I still thought that I would come out of that program and work at a museum. But let me tell you, this was way before sort of this wave of people understanding DEI. Museums are very, very difficult to break into as a career. And a lot of the museums that are doing these blockbuster exhibitions of Black art, they were not doing that 10 years ago or 15 years ago when I came out of school. So I could not get a job at a museum. But I had some like internships and doing things like that. I ended up got a fellowship at a really large performing arts venue in DC or in Virginia, actually. It's called Wolf Trap, sort of like the sister organization to the Kennedy Center. Got some great mentorship there. And though I couldn't get into a museum after that fellowship, I worked for Montgomery County, Maryland. And I'll tell you, the woman who was working there at the time, who was the public arts manager, her name is Michelle Cohen. She's currently the curator of the Capitol so she does public art for the Capitol buildings and all of that. She became my mentor in public art. I was working in a totally different field for that agency. I was doing communications and marketing, but I was also sort of talked my way into being the curator for our exhibition space. So I was getting and developing my curatorial skills. And when Michelle left to work for the Capitol, I said, hey, this public art vacant role, like I can do that. And our CEO at the time, she said, yeah, take this role. And I did. So with very sort of had a great background in visual arts and arts programming, community arts, but I didn't know really what public arts was. And the lovely thing that Michelle did for me is that she gave me an entire library of public art books before she left. So I got to study and I got to learn. And then funnily enough, when I took that role as the public arts manager in Montgomery County, we were hiring a public art consultant to do a master plan for the county. And again, so in this role, I'm managing a collection of public art that's about 40 years old, has thousands of works, about 500 works. In the public realm, Montgomery County is pretty big. So we needed to figure out exactly what to do with this really aging but wonderful collection of work. And we hired a consultant named Todd Bressie. And I mean, he's just like a rock star in the public art world. And he became my mentor. He advocated for me. He helped me land a position with Americans for the Arts as in their public art advisory network. He was like, hey, this is something that you should do. And I submitted an application and was elected. So I would say all of those really happy sort of circumstances, that position becoming available and being gifted a lot of books, working with Todd while he was doing his consultancy for our agency and learning from him, and then being pushed into Americans for the Arts, where there was I had colleagues who were also public art managers for other agencies across the country. It was really, it was the best sort of learning experience that you could get outside of like a academic context. And so I learned a lot and kind of stumbled into the field. But what I realized is that there's not really like a public art degree. At least there wasn't back then. So a lot of people have very similar backgrounds like me. They either studied art history or they were moving from a curatorial role in a museum or what would traditionally be a museum context into the public realm, or they had some experience working in civic government because a lot of public art programs came out of that background as well, that construct. So yeah, it's been, let's see, almost 10 years now, I think, that I've been working in this field, and it's been wonderful. But it's definitely a happy accident.
I mean, it's like being open to the experience that you were being introduced to. I also hear flowers to Michelle and Todd for their mentorship. Yeah, because having someone there that's like, here, take my books. That's huge.
And they're great books. They're like rare public art books from like the 70s and 80s. I still have them. I will never part with them. But there's just so much that you need to know in this field that you can get from mentorships or that you can study. And there's never enough learning in this field. So yeah, it was great, especially working with Todd as a consultant, because I was actually his manager because he came in as a consultant. I was managing his work, but learning from him also. And then when I ended up leaving Montgomery County, we still worked together. I started consulting and we would work and partner together up until, I would say, a year ago. He kept me along and I kept learning from him. And he's a wonderful guy.
So I'm hearing like the power of relationships, mentorships, reading, knowing the craft, being in community with other public art managers. That helps you like stay engaged, but also, I guess, maybe expands your way of thinking and keeps you connected. That's amazing. I love that. You mentioned Wolf Trap, and we are interviewing the executive director of Wolf Trap.
The executive director, you're talking about Arvind?
Yes.
Listen, I love Arvind Manocha. The wonderful thing about that fellowship, Allison, is that as a fellow, I had to rotate through the different offices at Wolf Trap, but I also got like a bi-weekly meeting with the CEO. And when I was working at Wolf Trap, we had one CEO who was outgoing, who'd been there for a long time. I think his name is Terry Jones. He left, and then Arvin came in. So I got to see two different leadership styles and got to see sort of what transitional leadership looked like. But Arvin is a wonderful, wonderful guy, really smart, brilliant man, who I think he was coming from McKinsey at the time into Wolf Trap. And so he brought all this really great problem solving, system, strategic planning experience to that role. He's a wonderful guy. I miss that guy. Hey, Marvin.
Hey, Arvin. I saw him. I was at a talk and he was being interviewed. And I know Wolf Trap. I had worked with them through my work at Arts Presenters years ago, developing professional development for arts administrators. At the time, Terry was there. So when I saw that
Yes.
there was I don't even know how long he had been there, a new guy in the role, I was like, oh, I
Yes.
want to hear what he has to say. And when I listened to him, he talked about his journey starting with artists, but also starting as an artist, but then like, what do I do with this? And then ending up in the consulting world. And then
Mhm.
going back to arts, like I think maybe LA Phil and
He was at
okay,
the
the
Hollywood
Hollywood Bowl.
Bowl.
Okay. And I thought,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I don't know how many people out there, because I had a very similar path. I worked for Booz Allen though, not McKinsey. And I remember thinking, these skills are amazing. Also, I'm not sure that Booz Allen is where I want to stay. And so using those, I still to this day use many of the skills that I learned and used there in my
Of
business. But
course.
I was like, oh, I need to talk to him. And so I walked up to him and I was just like, I have a podcast and I think you
Great.
and literally just like that. And I thought, who knows? Like, I'm sure he's a busy man. But we chatted a little bit there and then we chatted by Zoom. And he's like, yeah, I'll do this.
He is so kind and really giving, and he started off in that role like that. I'm sure probably didn't want to be spending his time chatting with me, a fellow, while he's trying to figure out how to work in his agency. But he was so generous. He's a great guy. You're gonna
Yes,
love chatting
flowers
with
to
him.
Arvin. And the fact that he saw the value in speaking with fellows and everybody that was supporting Wolf Trap's vision. That is incredible. Now, okay, what's one public art project, whether you worked on it or you just admired it, that stopped you in your tracks recently?
Ooh, recently
If not recently,
stopped me in my tracks. It's taking me a second to figure that out, and let me just preface that because I literally just had a
Ah,
baby, so I've been in a
ouch.
fog of like maternity leave. So
Yeah.
let me stopped me in my
Mm,
okay. Before I came to the Beltline, I was consulting and I was working on a master plan with Todd, with my homeboy Todd in Reno,
mm,
Nevada. And Reno has a really wonderful, obviously, there's a beautiful history and indigenous
mhm,
community out there. And we were really interested to see how the indigenous communities, their history was reflected in public art. And I can't tell you the name of this work, I don't
mm,
know it, but they've been integrating public art into their bridges and tunnels and underpasses there. And there is one really stellar, monumental work of public art that's integrated into a really large bridge that kind of spans the
mm,
highway. And it tells the story of the indigenous community
mm,
there. And so there's animals, there's motifs, there's mosaics, there's tile, there's sculpture, there's painting. So it's a multiple mediums combined in this work. I'll have to Google the name of the artists that were involved in it, but we were in touch with the indigenous community out there, and I'm blanking on the
mm,
name of that group, but they gave us a tour of that work because they were, and rightfully so, they were consulted and they served as the advisors on how the history should be depicted, what colors should be used, what motifs, even what the poses of the sculptures, because they had some animal sculptures that represented traditional stories. They advised on all of it. So they were walking us through that process of their collaboration with the artist and with the city on that work.
wow.
And that really stopped me because at least now at this part in my career, I'm super interested in how the stories of underrepresented, often marginalized groups can show up and be better uplifted in public art. And so that's sort of what's catching my eye these days. And I thought they did a really great job.
Thank you for sharing that. And like, we will follow up with you to see if we can find the name or get a.
Oh yeah, no, you're gonna get it in
Okay,
like 5 minutes.
cool. We'll put it in the show notes.
But it's yeah, it's Reno Sparks, the indigenous community out there in
Uh,
Reno, Nevada. really wonderful. They also gave us a tour of their sort of museum space and talked to us about their collaborations with the larger museums there, which has been sort of interesting and fraught, but really great conversation. It's interesting. I've been doing I have done recently some work with Indigenous artists. Before I came to the Beltline, I was also working for the airport in Charlotte, and we worked with a really wonderful artist who's is an Indigenous artist, but she's I think they say that it's Dene in Arizona. So that's the group that she's from, but she collaborated with Catawba Indians for the work in Charlotte. So I've been doing really like a deep dive of Indigenous artists and how they show up in public artwork. Obviously, my background as a Black person, but absolutely, somebody went to Howard, was African American history and the Black arts movement. That's always really been my area of focus. But it's always nice to make sure that you're at least conversant and learning more about everybody's culture, because one thing about working for a city and wanting to make sure that everybody's represented, all of the communities, especially consulting, you want to make sure that there's a touch point for everybody. And so you often have to get out of your comfort zone. So I've been trying to be more conscious and being more intentional about
Well, I hear that thoughtfulness, and I'm so glad you were able to share that with us. I'm thinking about how you said they advise with people that could tell them as much about the animal and the stories and which way they should be facing. Like the detail about that shows the intention, because they could have just thrown anything up there and called it something. And it takes time and resources to make space for that level of thoughtfulness. And I'm like, I can't wait to see what it is. Okay, let me get back to my question. As the first ever director of arts and culture at Atlanta Beltline Art, you're leading one of the largest public art exhibitions in the country. What does that kind of coordination actually look like behind the scenes, especially when you're engaging with different and distinct communities?
Yeah, well, and thank you for saying that. The Atlanta Beltline is such a huge project with a lot of eyes on it, a lot of national attention, and I was so excited about this opportunity to work for the Beltline, Atlanta Beltline Art. It's our program, and it's in our 15th year now, 10th or 15th year. And you're right, it is expansive and it demands a lot of intentionality, but also a lot of coordination. And I'll tell you, I think what makes the program really successful is that there is so much collaboration within our organization. And so we have an art program, obviously, but there's a community engagement program. And I think really brilliantly, our program is situated, at least organizationally, under planning and community engagement that has its own offices and directors. It was intentional that we were to be in conversation and to work collaboratively. So there's always like an aspect of our planning that involves thinking about community, thinking about future development. And then also too, we have other divisions. I mean, the Beltline is a huge undertaking and a large organization, but because arts and culture is so important to the city and so important to this project, everybody works to support or to uplift arts and culture through their work. Even when we're thinking about the actual trail construction itself, those folks there are thinking about how does this reflect culture? And so we're all in conversation. And I think that's the way that we've been successful since the program has started. And I'm really excited about thinking about ways to harness that and to better focus our work.
That sounds amazing. Like effective collaboration can result in incredible experiences for those that come in contact with what you've been creating. I love that Atlanta uplifts the arts in the way that you described and are thoughtful about it as they make plans. It sounds like in your role, there's a level of vision, intention, coordinating with different people. Are you also speaking with like city planners or?
Well, that's the funny thing. So there are planners that work in the Beltline.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah. So the arts program, we're under the division of planning and engagement. So our leadership comes from the background of urban design and planning. the Beltline, it goes across the whole city. So there's sectors, we have divisions and communities. I mean, we are so community driven, so neighborhood driven. I think there's 45 different neighborhoods that the Beltline has an interaction with. So we're thoughtful about what the history of those neighborhoods
Mhm.
are. We just came out of a really large process of coordinating the next exhibition for the Beltline. And when I say that, we made sure that we had community members from each of those neighborhoods and each of those communities in those panels, selecting the artists, giving us feedback about what they liked that we did in the past and what they want to see going forward. I mean, we really changed the way that we do our artist selection process and made it much more community focused and
Mm.
engaged. So the next time you see new art on the Beltline, just know that we reached out to each part of the trail and each neighborhood that's adjacent to it and got community members from all of those neighborhoods to look at the proposals that came in. And there's going to be art program for each quadrant of the Beltline
Mhm.
now. So there's a lot of intentionality
Yeah.
and making sure that I think one of the things that pains me as a public arts administrator is when people see public art and they're like, where did that come from? And
Mm.
why is that here? I want to make sure that at least for the Beltline, we're not giving that experience to
Mhm.
community members. Because again, the Beltline is so huge. It touches every part of Metro Atlanta. It's such an important project, such an important, ambitious project for the city that I want to make sure that at least the art component, we get
Mhm.
it right. And if we get it wrong broadly, at least we got it right for that specific
Mhm.
neighborhood that was a part of the conversation, who has to live with it every day,
And
you
I
know?
think when you invite people to be a part of the planning process, there's a different level of agency and ownership around the spaces that they share. I often talk about that in our own work, and it makes me think about this project. I was literally in a conversation yesterday where they were asking us about what we did. At one point, the project was very siloed. One group over here doing their thing, and then another group
Yeah,
doing their thing. And because they were doing their own things without talking to each other, sometimes there were overlaps and sometimes it was duplicated efforts, and it just wasn't working. And when we decided to bring all the different pieces to the table to be a part of the dialogue at the same time, it changed everything, like, not just our awareness around what each group of people were doing, but how we planned it in a cohesive way so that one part spoke to the other part, or the folks that were at the room working with, in this case, grantees directly, they had a very distinct experience that may have been different than someone that was in a different role. So they were there able to speak with the grantees about what was going on. And it's just like,
right,
there's no, sometimes people think, "Oh, if I include this person," and I don't even know if it's intentional, but, like, we can't include everybody, or not seeing the richness of having the diverse perspectives there. Like, but that creates a more comprehensive program design in our case, and in our case, the grantees felt it. Like, they felt the difference between when we were working as a unit, values aligned and cohesive, and where we were like over here, there, and all the things. And I think that, yeah, it is a gift, not anything less. It's surely a gift to be able to work in that way and to be in a space that encourages that, because that's not a given.
right.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I really have to give our hats off to our leadership, our CEO, because he's like, a good idea is a good idea. And so if it comes from one side of our entity or your side, everybody's input is
Mhm.
important. We work for the Beltline, but we're also community members too, with ideas, and might live in these neighborhoods, might have insight that's important. So yeah, collaboration is key. I would say that's one of the reasons, one, for the art departments in Atlanta Beltline Art, its success, but also just a Beltline success, is that there's so many really brilliant people working in planning, working in community engagement, working in events, working in fundraising, that are in conversation, and understand too that, especially for a city like Atlanta, culture is important. The arts is
Mhm.
important. the arts was one of the strategies on the early onset of this project to get people out on the Beltline. It's like, okay, well, we're building this thing. How do we get people to understand what it is? How do we get people out here? Like, oh, let's integrate art. So understanding that it's been a tool from the beginning, everybody's invested in it, and not just community members, but also all of
Yes,
us.
yes. And I think when we talk about collaboration, it's easy to say, oh, yeah, it was a collaboration when it really wasn't. But like true
Right.
collaboration is a mutual respect for each other's lane, if you will. Like whatever the thing is that you
Yeah.
do, you respect the other
Yes.
person that they do. And even when there is tension because of a disagreement, it is what I call healthy tension that you navigate in order to get to the best outcome. And I appreciate it because you can see it when it's happening effectively, and then you can also see it when it's not. So,
I'm seeing like panel conversations and meetings, like as you're talking about like healthy tension, and I'll just echo what you're saying. I think it's so important to have a diversity of thought represented in these conversations in your planning as you're building something. Have different people's viewpoints there, and being able to, again, while being mindful not to step on anybody's toes and to respect people's respective thing that they do, making sure everybody's viewpoints is at the table, even if it's like a thing that's like, okay, this is totally off base. It might still spark like, but we should consider it from this perspective. We should know how to address this concern because this is going to come up again. So, to your
yeah.
point, healthy tension is good, and it's good that there's consultants and facilitators like you that help people navigate those
Yeah.
those tricky
I
moments.
always talk to our team about that. Like, I don't know everything. Like, I hire smart people that know what they know so that as we get into the room where we're like putting together the gumbo or whatever, that we
That
can
is
like all
good.
come from a place of knowledge. And that also helps with your own leadership. Like, lean into speak it with conviction. And sometimes it's accepted and we move with it, other times it's not, but there's a clear understanding that you have the space to say what you got to say. And even if I, as the ultimate business owner, is like, I don't know if that's the direction, I'll even talk about why and or where we might use something like that later on. So it's not, nothing's lost. And I think that having space to be seen, heard, again, it just contributes to agency and the willingness to engage in the process. So, kudos. I love to hear that. I love to hear that. Now I'm like, I need to go to Atlanta.
No, no, Allison, you're dropping gems. You keep saying things. I'm like, yes, bringing people to the table with some knowledge, and I think that is so key because you don't know everything, right? And you can't hire for every skill set and every knowledge base. So really being intentional and being wise about like, okay, like how can we bring a consultant in? How can we bring somebody on a temporary basis that has this expertise? We've done that a lot at the Beltline, especially around like,
Hmm.
style writing, other fields, and even other communities where we might not have like a history in. It's like, okay, well, who do we know? How do we have a relationship here that we can lean on? And it's so important that when you reach out to people for their knowledge, you respect it and you lean
Hmm.
into it. But you don't always, it's not always going to be in
Right.
house. Sometimes it's not in the community.
And because it's not packaged a certain way doesn't mean that it's not as valuable, not backed by a
Right.
statistic or not, however it is, it comes from a place of experience. And I think that that mutual respect for that can take you way farther than believing that you know all the things because nobody knows all the things.
Absolutely.
All
Yeah.
right. I love that. Okay. All right. You talked a little bit earlier about Charlotte Douglas International Airport. And then I hear you talking about Atlanta, visited
Hmm.
Reno, Nevada. You worked in Montgomery County. How do you adapt your approach when you're curating for an airport versus a community versus
Yeah.
a museum
Oh, that's a great question. I think because I came into public art, at least in, my first year working as a public art manager, I got to work on a master plan. I got
Mhm.
to lean really into consulting and see that process. There really is a practice. Like I know I'm talking to like speaking to the choir around consulting. There's a huge at least I think there should be a large part of your work where you're just focused on learning, you're focused on research, you're focused on talking to stakeholders. So I try, I mean, in even in my work now, I'm not consulting, but I still approach my work from that vantage point of like, how can I learn as much as I need to know? What do I need to know? How do I get that information? Who should I talk to? And you want to sort of make sure that all of those understandings, all of that background shows up in your work. So curating for an airport, I'm not from Charlotte, but I had to understand the cultural nuances and norms of Charlotte. Luckily, I've been traveling and my mom worked for the airport. So I understood the airport environment, but everyone is different. So I had to think from the perspective of a passenger, somebody traveling, like, what experience do they want after a long day of travel, after a really hectic day of like getting your kids together and trying to get from one place to the next? You know, you want to be, you know, excited, you want to be stimulated. You also maybe you want to relax. Maybe you just need a break. Maybe you just need a quiet place in the airport where you can just sit and see something really
Mhm.
exciting. Or maybe you want to capture all of the stories from all the people. Maybe, you know, you're thinking, okay, there's people coming to our city for the first time. This is the first glance of our city they're going to get. What do we want to
Mhm.
show them? So we often thought from that perspective. But in terms of how do I curate for different cities, I really try to do as much research as I can, and I try to put myself in the shoes of the visitor, of the person that's walking around that object, and think about their experiences. So you often really just have to put yourself in somebody else's shoes for a second to the best ability that you
Mhm.
can.
Feel that. Okay, now I mentioned when I introduced you at Black Monuments, and this is on
Yeah.
Instagram. I went and saw it.
Yes,
Okay, how did
yes.
that come to be? And tell us what it is and why it exists.
Yeah. So Black Monuments was really honestly just like a fun thing that I did for myself. We were talking earlier about you're working and you're doing all of these things, and sometimes you just need like an outlet. Black Monuments was an outlet
Mhm.
for me. Just thinking about a lot. Not only do a lot of people not know what public art is, they don't understand that at least African Americans, people of African descent, have been in this space, have been working in this field. And I would say, at least in America, the sort of government federally funded public art auspice, I would say it's maybe 50, 60 years old now. Lord, we've been there even then. We've been working in public art since the WPA and Works Progress Administration. But even before that, we have a really long tradition of building monuments, telling our story in the public realm that often is not celebrated. And so I really wanted to celebrate artists that were working in public art that were Black. I wanted to highlight their work also from like a technical perspective. So I often think like in materials, like, well, what was the budget for this? Who supported this work? And what were the materials? And where is this? Where can I find this? So I started trying to just map out public artists, Black public artists and their work across the country, especially knowing that those artists were not often
Mhm.
celebrated. So that's really how that Instagram page came about. Now it's gone dormant for a while because again,
Been
I've
living.
been having some kids and life has been lifing. But my plan is to go back to that page because it's a wonderful outlet for me. There's so many Black public artists that are in their 70s, that are in their 80s, that I feel like have not been properly
Mhm.
celebrated. And I think just having been in this field, I remember in grad school, we were talking about, I was telling one of my professors that I wanted to work in a museum. And they're like, oh, good luck for that. Black people don't go to museums. Like straight to my face.
Mm.
And I was like, huh? I'm like, so yes, Black people go to
Yes.
museums. Black people have created public art. Black people are sculpting. Black people are painting murals, and we have been. And so this is, I just, I'm and continuing to like unearth and to highlight our history and our representation in this space, so that people are not like, oh, it's like this is DI. No, this is
Mhm.
we've been here. This is our rightful space. We've been innovating in this field for a really
I
long
am
time.
glad you're there to do that because someone that, depending on where you live, we spoke about this a little earlier, you may be so isolated that all you see is what whoever you are and the people that look like you don't see other people. But it's important to know, no, no, there is so much more going on
Yeah.
that you don't even know about. And let me show you where it is
Yep.
because no, we don't.
Yeah, there's and what I learned, I mean, what became much more clear to me, just pulling out pieces from across the country that we've created. There's so many really wonderful works of art that were created in the 70s and the 60s and the 80s that we live with, that we have lived with
Mhm.
for decades, that somebody like created, and you just wouldn't know. In the same way that people interact with public art and just don't know. So I just think that it's important to like just call that out and to highlight that. And so, and my hope is that people are a little bit more curious when they go out into their parks and into their government building and they see frieze on the side of the building or they see a fountain. Like they really think a little bit more clearly, more carefully around like, well, who did that? How did
Mhm.
that get here? Because either somebody created it or somebody tore around it. Somebody weighed in on that work, and so that's the weird work that I
Yeah,
do.
and it is so necessary, and it brings light to, like you said, to people that are moving through life, and they're like, "Hmm."
Yeah.
I've definitely, when I lived in downtown Alexandria, Virginia, there was right on the water, there were always these exhibitions and they were always like mind-boggling. Like they always provoked conversation. I would be talking to someone that I was with, and then see someone looking at something. Next thing you know, we're talking, and it's like, oh, I love that art does that, and that people of all
Yes.
different experiences end up doing that together. And even if like you just go outside because you need some air, because like the office is like, I can't take it. Seeing something that takes your eye off of whatever it is that you were doing in your office
Yeah.
is necessary.
Yeah, it's important. It's important. I feel like any way that we can reaffirm each other, that we can see reflections of ourselves, that we can remind ourselves of our shared experiences, our shared culture, and our humanity. I think that's what public art does the
Mhm.
best. Or just give you just a moment of peace because life is chaotic enough, especially now. Then we're doing our job,
Mhm.
and I think that's the really great role that art has in our society.
And during COVID, when everyone was at home and unable to be out in spaces, people flocked to art, all kinds of art
Yes.
to get through the day. And I'm just like, come on, y'all. This
Yeah.
is what it is. Like,
I would say I think that COVID, when people couldn't really go into
mhm.
buildings, I would say public art honestly became a lot more of a thing for people.
Mm,
They're like, oh well, we can't go to the museum, we can't go into this building, but there's art and there's things
mhm.
outside. Before I was employed by the Beltline, I was working for the airport, but because of COVID, all of that was shut down. So I was like, I'll just keep
Mhm.
it from Atlanta. And I'll fly into work when I
Yes.
need to. And it's the funny thing. I was going onto the Beltline and jogging or walking, just being in public spaces and public parks, because I still needed to like get out and get some fresh air and exercise and walk. And I had no idea that I'd be working for the
Mhm.
Beltline within the next 2 or 3 years.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, our public spaces are so important.
As we're talking about this, I am moved to ask our listeners to even reflect on the spaces that surround them, the public art that surrounds them. What does it say to you? How does it make you feel? What, if anything, does it provoke? Because I think that we often experience it, but like to our earlier conversation, it's like, how did it get here? Or it's gone, and will
Yeah,
it come back? It's like
yeah,
you don't know. It's not necessarily the
yeah.
thing that you hear about. And one of the reasons why I wanted to have this podcast and interview people like you is because when people are wondering how and or who does this, they can say, oh, Amina. Like, not only does she just do it, she does it with intention and has done it in so many areas of the world or the country. And I think about that perspective, having traveled around the country and seeing different art around the country, even informing how you think about what comes together. We've been chatting for a long time. I have a few more questions. I swear. You kind of talked about this when you mentioned Black monuments, but I wonder if there's something else. Okay. The work that you do demands a lot. You're navigating large scale projects, different people, different relationships, systems change, and actual care for community. What keeps you grounded in the midst of all of this?
That's Allison. What keeps
Space
me
for
grounded?
wellness.
Yeah, I really think that when things get
Mm,
fraught, and they often
mm,
do, I remember my experience as an artist, that my life as an artist didn't really, at least as a professional artist, it was not a long one. But I studied art at Howard. I got a BFA. I studied photography, and I understand how sensitive it is to create something and to put it out into
mhm,
the world. I also understand the perspective of being somebody in the community looking for inspiration. Maybe you don't feel comfortable going to a
mhm,
gallery because a lot of often historically those spaces haven't always been
mhm,
welcoming. Maybe the only sort of time that I might get is going to the park. I try to really just think about the impact of the work that I'm doing on community members, the people who experience it, residents that are living in these spaces, but also think about their perspective of the artist who, is being so vulnerable and so brave and creating something and trying to share it with the world. So I'm often like in the middle of those experiences, a person that's experiencing the art, a person that's creating it. And so when things get
mhm,
tricky and I have to go either into advocacy mode, advocating from those
mhm,
perspectives, the perspective of the artist or the perspective of the person experienced that work, or who might see themselves in that work or might just get a little bit of a moment of joy from the work. That grounds me. Just thinking like this is important to the community, the city, and this is important for the artist who's creating something, who's sharing something, who's probably wanting to go to the next place in their career, or maybe they're exploring something new and want that to be uplifted. That is like the reminder of like, why am I doing this and why is this
mhm.
important? So that's the grounding thing for me.
Where and in what ways does wellness find its way in your life?
Well, for me personally, I am a person that I need to go for my
Mm,
walks. I need to do my exercise. And it's so funny. I mean, I think I ended up in public art because I'm somebody that's always exploring my
mm,
environment. I've always been a person who's like, okay, I need to go to the
mhm,
park. And parks obviously have been such an important space for public art. Most public arts you see, you're, at least historically, it has been in a park, in a
mhm,
plaza, in a community space. So just personally, I'm a person that needs to get outdoors and go for a
mhm.
walk. So wellness is important. You can't do this work from a place where either your physical health or your mental health is not at its
Yeah.
best. And in both of those respects, I try to make sure that I'm doing myself, doing my own due diligence and making sure I'm getting my walks in, my exercise in, making sure that my mental health is great. I'm talking to friends. I'm tapping in with a therapist if I
Mhm.
need to.
There.
That and then I'm listening to my own spirituality, listening to my own
Mhm,
inner self because sometimes when you're so like caught up in your day to day, you're not going to catch those signs that your body is telling you to slow down
right.
or your own piece is saying, hey, we need to check in. So that's so important. You can't do this work or any work well if you're not showing up for yourself.
Amen. I think about wellness and creative spaces and how we pour so much of ourselves into the spaces that we occupy. And I wonder how much time we are pouring back into ourselves. Those who feel like they have the resources, the opportunity, the access, the time. Because creatives can work all kinds of hours, like long hours
Mhm.
on weekend, like what are weekend, it just depends. So I'm curious about that, especially this season. I'm asking all of our guests about wellness.
Yeah, and you know what's funny because now you made me really think carefully about that. I started in this art world as a photography student
Mm,
in high school. And this is way before digital. So I was in a dark room. And at Howard, I continued to study photography. And at the end of it, I realized like, okay, I'm doing this not because I want to be a professional photographer. I know that this is not but it took me a while to figure that out. Being an artist is not my thing, but the act of working in a dark room, creating something and then developing it in a dark room was therapeutic and it was meditative. That's what drew me to photography. It wasn't this thing about being a photographer. It was the way that I was able to be introspective and reflective and observant, because photography is all about seeing and observing and capturing something. That whole process was what was attractive to me. And it's still a reflection of, I think, some sort of self-care, being able to be still and to sit with yourself and to sit with your thoughts. That was, I mean, my photography was really all about the darkroom experience for me. And I think it can be tricky when you work in the arts, but your outlet is also the art.
Yes. Okay.
My outlet was the arts, but it's also now my work. And it's so tricky trying to do both.
Yeah, because you need to step away, have a different experience. That is a word. Yeah, and most of the people I know that work in the arts is also the place where they go. And it's like,
Yeah.
That is fascinating. Huh. Oh, wow. Okay, so for someone who wants to work in public art, and maybe even with a focus in equity and community impact, what's your advice for how to navigate the field, how to get connected? I want to just pause and say this Hamptonian will give Howard credit for training so many creatives. Their program has just produced so many people. And even on this show, at least 4 or 5 people have shouted out that they went to Howard undergrad. And so I'll give y'all props.
Listen, and hey, shout out to Hampton. Hampton has always had a really wonderful museum and visual arts tradition, art history tradition, museum studies tradition. So listen, it's all love.
All love. How does someone do this work? How do they get involved?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, and I told you, I kind of really, it's like I had that background, but I definitely got lucky and I stumbled into this field, but I was really looking for mentorship. And I would advise anybody that's trying to work in public art to study across disciplines. So learn your art history, learn your visual arts as much as you can, but also seek out mentorships and mentors and ask for help. Do your own research. You have to have your own sort of academic rigor. You have to display that because a lot of it is research. And also a lot of it is understanding community and community engagement. Community engagement is such a huge component of public art. So I would say and again, for me, the field was arts administration and all of it shows up in my work. The fact that I studied photography and fine arts shows up in my work is I have to draw on that to be successful. I have to draw on an understanding of art history. I have to draw on an understanding fundraising and community engagement. So as much experience, as much cross-disciplinary experience you can get in the arts would be great. As much mentorship you can seek that out. And there's a lot of really great conferences. I know Americans for the Arts for a really long time had a public art pre-conference. So I would say any sort of association, membership-based group of colleagues you can find, lean in there as well. But there's, at least the way that I broke into this field, there was no sort of set path. I feel like it was a lot of happy accidents because I had to go so many different places, one to just get a check, but also to just get experience.
Yeah.
And ultimately that was beneficial for me.
Is there a way that a community member can support public art?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you, one of the things that we did at the Beltline as we were sort of doing our annual call for art and seeking out art from community members and from artists, one of the things that we did also was do a call for community members to say, hey, listen, I know y'all have opinions. If you want to weigh in on what gets selected and what gets advanced, let us know. And I'll tell you, we had much more interest from community members to say, hey, I want to select, I want to weigh in. People are so passionate about the Beltline, which is what I really love.
Yes.
So yeah, there's always an opportunity to weigh in. I would say most commissioning entities, and I mean like any group or city that is supporting visual art or public art,
Mm-hmm.
will have a process, we call it an artist selection panel,
Mm-hmm.
a lot like grant makers will have grantee panels.
Mm-hmm.
So you can just ask and say, hey, do you have any panels coming up? Do you have any artist selection panels coming up? And you don't need arts experience to participate in that. You just have to have an opinion, and you have to show some sort of vested interest. For me, I'm like, okay, do you live in this community? So that's always the thing for me. It's like, we want you to live in the community where the art is going, but there's always a way.
Is there like a version of a Beltline in every community? Is that where people would find it in their community?
I would say no.
Oh.
No, I mean, the Beltline is special, but there is.
Is it like local arts?
Yes. So you're going to be looking for a local arts network, a local arts agency, sorry.
Mhm.
So most cities that are getting funded, at least either federally or from the state or from a region that gives out grants for the arts, will have like a process. So you can participate that way.
Okay.
But there are other sort of like outdoor public art collections, kind of like the Beltline. Oh, and man, I'm blanking. But there's a couple in New York. I think Philadelphia has, and when I say unique, I'm talking about where we've taken an old railroad corridor and repurposed it for the purpose of trail making.
Oh.
That is relatively unique, but there are other cities that are doing that. And we operate in a similar way to a local arts agency, where we're commissioning works, we're providing resources to artists and communities to support works of art. So that is a commonality.
Okay. Thanks for making that distinction. I know sometimes people are like, I want to get involved, but I don't know how. Listen, okay, I have held you long enough. I'm not going to ask you any more questions.
Oh, well, listen, I'm happy to be here, and as much time as you need, Allison, I'm happy to conversate with you.
I appreciate that. Well, okay. I lied. One last question. How can people stay in touch or find your work? Where can listeners find your work? Any final messages?
Well, no final messages.
Okay.
I just want to thank you for inviting me to chat with you. I want to thank you for the work that you're doing, highlighting the ways that the arts and culture are supported and who's doing that work and why that work is important. This is such a really important platform, and you're such a knowledgeable maven in this field. So I want to shout you out. Yeah, I'm so pleased to be here. Yeah, I would just ask people to just stay involved in what the Beltline is doing. Our website is Atlanta Beltline, or you can visit us in Atlanta. We're on our way to complete. We're still building the actual Beltline corridor.
Okay.
But we're close to completing that loop.
Okay.
So continue to come and visit the Beltline and check out our arts program and give us your feedback. I would say that. And then on Instagram, I'm not on social media spaces as much, at least personally, but my handle is Black Monuments, and I'm going to try to be more diligent about updating that space, because that's something that I'm still very much passionate about, the pioneering Black artists that have been in this field and that have made a way for myself and other arts administrators, public art administrators doing this work, because people have very little knowledge about how this work gets done. And it's important work. It's not important that you know who I am, but it's important that you understand the efforts that artists are undertaking to bring you joy and to uplift your story and to reflect your culture in a public space. So I would say that.
Well, thank you. It's been an honor. And to our listeners, thank you for listening to another fabulous episode of Cultural Catalyst. Stay tuned and look out for the show notes, because they're going to be detailed, and I'm excited to share everything that we can with you. All right. Until next time. Thank you for tuning in to Cultural Catalyst. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us for more inspiring stories from the world of arts and entertainment. You can find me on social media at MCE Arts and Alison T. McNeil on LinkedIn. Please leave a review and tune in to our next episode for more creatives behind the curtain. See you next time.